In this video, we're going to review the installation of the DORMA D862 double-cylinder Grade 1 heavy-duty deadbolt. Now, as I get ready to get started, there's a couple important things that I want to touch on. One of them is that we do not want to install this lock to ever block a path of traffic. We have to make sure that when installing a double-cylinder lock that we are in agreement with all building codes and the authority having jurisdiction over the building. Also make sure that there are both smoke detectors and fire extinguishers installed in the building, as we certainly don't want the use of a double-cylinder deadbolt to result in a tragedy. They can be very useful, and they're an important kind of hardware. We just have to make sure that it is installed in the appropriate place. Now, as we get started, I want you to notice that this happens to be a steel door that we're working on. It's already pre-prepared for our lock. It has two 2 1/8 inch holes. The lower hole would be used for a latching style lock, usually a lever lock. Now, it's very important that we understand that a lever lock operating this latch has an important job. This latch that is installed in the door has the job of holding the door in the proper position so that when we locate the strike for our deadbolt, that everything lines up properly. Deadbolts are not designed to hold the door shut in its normal position. That's the latch's job. The deadbolt is an additional lock to provide security. Now that we've covered that, I'm going to show you one of the neat tools I use in order to install this lock properly in a wood frame application. I have a small wood dowel here, and it happens to have a little center marker on it. This would be inserted into the hole for the 1-inch crossbore where our deadbolt would be installed. What I would do now is I would close this door so that the bottom latch locks and holds the door in the proper position. Then I would slide this over so that the tip would make a mark on the door frame and identify the exact center of where we need to install this strike plate. Now I'm going to show you the strike plate that we would use with this lock. The strike plate consists of 3 separate components that I've got in my hand here. They are the reinforcing plate, the dust box, and the cover plate. Now, it's also very important to understand that we use 3-inch long wood screws that would hold the reinforcing plate in place. These wood screws would be installed up against the doorstop so that they would go into the 2x4s backing up the door frame to provide kick resistance. However, they are not needed in a metal frame application. Once we have installed this, then we can put on the decorative cover plate and provide a finished appearance. When properly installed in the door frame, this should be flush with the edge of the frame and centered directly opposite where our deadbolt is going to throw. Now that we've taken a look at the strike, we're ready to take a look at installing the components of the deadbolt. What I want you to notice on this deadbolt is that there is a large bar on the top that throws and retracts the deadbolt itself, and we want to put that in on top. So we're going to put it in this orientation so that that bar is on the top, and I'm going to install it with the included screws. It's always important to use the appropriate screws that are included, as these were what was used when the lock was tested by Underwriter's Laboratory. Now, whenever I install screws for the first time, one of the things that I do, I use just a little bit of stick wax so that I can provide just a little bit of lubricant so that they go in nice and smooth. These screws are for both wood and metal doors, as they have both wood screw and metal threads. Now, when I go to install them, I don't just tighten one all the way and then tighten the second one. I put one in first, I put the second one in, and then I go back and forth tightening them until they are both tightened down. If the door is prepared properly, the faceplate should recess in flush with the edge of the door. It is always very important to make sure that the screws are nice and tight, but you also want to make sure that you don't strip the screws and that you use a sharp number 2 Phillips screwdriver when installing them. Now that it's installed, you will also notice that the deadbolt happens to be in the out position. If yours is not in the out position, take your flat-bladed screwdriver through the center hole and turn it into the out position. because when it is in the outward position, we can only install our tailpieces in one position. This is very important as a deadbolt has a swiveling tailpiece, and we have to make sure that it is timed properly. If you install this with the bolt in the out position, you will have a successful installation. Now you will notice that I have turned my tailpiece so that it is vertical. It matches the vertical orientation of the turn hub in the deadbolt. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to take a steel security shield. I'm going to slide that through from the outside. Once I've located the security shield, I'm going to install the outside deadbolt housing. Now that I've installed the outside deadbolt housing, I'm going to take the inside deadbolt housing. As you can see, I've already turned the tailpiece so that it is in the vertical position, matching what I did on the outside. I'm going to carefully install this so that the tailpiece comes in the hole in the deadbolt. Once I've done that, I'm going to hold the cylinder in place, and I'm going to find the 3 bolt-in screws. Now when you go to install these, you may have to wiggle them around just a little bit in order to get them through the deadbolt. And then we're going to screw them into the outside deadbolt mechanism. I'll get my second screw started. Now once we have these screws engaged, I don't have to worry about the deadbolt falling off the door. It's always very important that we do not want to drop the deadbolt because we would actually cause damage to the decorative trim. Now I go in and tighten these 2 screws. I'm going to tighten them alternately, and once I get them to where they are starting to tighten, I want you to watch the surface of the door. When we tighten these, if we see the surface of the door collapsing, it's going to indicate that we do not have sufficient reinforcement inside the door, and that can lead to a premature deadbolt failure. So we always want to make sure that the door is always properly reinforced prior to installing the lock. I notice while I'm tightening it down, I do not see the door collapsing, that I'm getting a nice firm installation. Now I'm going to alternate back and forth tightening these screws. We need to make sure that it is fastened tightly to the door, because with the expansion, contraction, and action of a door, untightened screws will become loose very quickly. Now that I've gotten both sides installed, I'm going to use the keys in order to test the deadbolt to make sure that it is throwing properly. I'll start on the outside. Now when you're checking the deadbolt, it's always very important to listen because you want to make sure that the deadbolt makes a nice, crisp, snapping sound, indicating that it is not dragging, that it is throwing smoothly. Now that I've checked both sides, I would now close the door with the latch holding the door shut. I would throw the bolt again to make sure that the bolt is not dragging on the strike plate in the door frame, and that it's going straight through the center. If you do have to push or pull where it's contacting the edge of the strike, what I normally do is I'll take a small dab of wax, or for example toothpaste, put it on the end of the bolt, I'll retract it, I'll close the door, and I'll throw it, and that toothpaste will leave a little mark on the edge of the strike so I can file it slightly. You shouldn't have to do much more than just a few strokes of the file if it is interfering. You always want to make sure that when the door is closed, the deadbolt can throw and retract without touching the strike plate, so it will have a long life. When the building expands and contracts, it will continue to operate properly. Now that I've checked this out, that the deadbolt is all working properly, one of the last steps in the process is to install the faceplate that would go over the inside cylinder in order to cover the heads of the screws. So after you've checked it, the last step is to put on the decorative faceplate, and then we'll move on to the next door.